It was shelled by Syrian government forces. I'm Peter Dobby. You're watching The Hub. You'll find the news you need to know here at The Hub. The other headlining stories today. Disaster at rush hour in Argentina. A commuter train crashes into barriers. Reports say at least 40 people have been killed. At least 5 killed as violent protests in Afghanistan continue over the burning of the Quran by NATO forces. And preparing for the worst, simulating a bomb attack on the London Underground in preparation for the Summer Olympic Games. First here on The Hub. Since the conflict in Syria began in March of last year, it's been difficult to obtain eyewitness accounts of what's been happening. Much of the evidence has been videos uploaded by civilian journalists onto the internet. Now, in recent months, some international journalists have been able to get into Syria, but few have remained. On Wednesday, 2 of them were killed in the ongoing bombardment of Homs by regime forces. One was the Sunday Times journalist Marie Colvin, who spoke to me on The Hub just yesterday. The other was the French photojournalist Ramy Jarrah. Activists say they were killed when a shell hit a makeshift media center in the Bاباعmrو district. We've also heard that a Syrian activist, Ramy al-Syed, who's been a key provider of video footage from Homs, was killed yesterday. I'm joined now on The Hub by Ramy Jarrah, a Syrian activist and journalist and co-founder of the Activist News Association, which coordinates with citizen journalists on the ground in Syria. Ramy, your friend and colleague, Ramy, was killed yesterday. We've had 2 journalists, high-profile journalists, the confirmation of their death today. What's your reading of what's going on in Homs itself?
Well, Homs is basically facing a full-force bombardment right now. The situation is unbelievable. These citizen journalists who are trying to cover what's happening aren't able to do this on their own. And obviously the journalists who have gone in, we've seen what happens to those journalists who go in as well. The city is surrounded from a number of areas. There's shelling by the minute, by the second, we can say now. The situation is unbelievable. We don't know where this is going now. The government continues to bombard the city with troops, with tanks, with even helicopters. This is not something ethical, and we don't know why until now. There isn't a solution for this. There isn't a step in.
So when we hear the only reaction, I think, that we've heard so far from the Syrian Ministry of Information talking about visas for journalists on the ground in Syria, talking about there may have been some journalists who've been injured in Homs. What goes through your mind when you hear that kind of stance, that kind of approach or a reaction to the events in Homs?
Well, given that we actually coordinate with journalists that decide to go in, the journalists that decide to actually be smuggled in are journalists that have tried to apply for these visas and haven't received these visas. So this is a lie, and this is part of the government's propaganda that these journalists who have been smuggled in could have gone in with visas. That's totally not the case. And even if they did go in with visas, they would be minded, and where they could go, they would be very limited. So the government saying that some of them have been injured and not actually admitting that journalists have been killed is also appalling, and I think proves just how far this regime is willing to go to continue its propaganda, that this is not a revolution and is in fact an armed resistance.
Okay. Just to interrupt you, Ramy, just one final point, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but we've just heard via our colleagues at the BBC's monitoring service, the Ministry of Information again quoting the relevant minister Adnan Mahmoud, saying the ministry has no knowledge of the entry or the presence of Marie Colvin or Ramy Jarrah and other foreigners on Syrian territories. You seem to be saying that stance is complete nonsense.
Of course it's nonsense. The government know exactly who's gone in. They've seen the reports that are coming out. They have a media team that follows these reports that are coming out. And those journalists who have died have written reports, and those reports were released yesterday. So the government was very aware of them being there. And I think didn't take into consideration that all the civilians on the ground who died, or Ramy al-Syed, who was also considered a citizen journalist, who was killed while rescuing people, taking them to a field hospital, where his car was hit with a rocket-propelled grenade and eventually led him to die. They're very aware of what's going on in Homs. They're very aware of who's there. And the attacks are ongoing. This is not the case. They're killing this revolution. They're killing the democracy movement. That's basically what it is.
Despite all that, Ramy, does the fight carry on to get the information out there?
Of course it carries on. It's, if I could go back to mentioning Ramy and Syed, Ramy is one of those people that was determined that people would see what was happening in Homs and, of course, Syria. Ramy, day by day, would go out, film those videos, bring them back, coordinate with us, coordinate with people around the world, with journalists, just so people could see what was happening, because journalists didn't have access. The protest movement is ongoing, the determination is there, and the government wants to kill that movement. And of course the government feels very affected by any journalist movement on the ground, and will do its best to take that out.
Ramy Jarrah in Cairo, many thanks. It's being reported that at least 40 people have been killed in a train accident in Buenos Aires. Hundreds more have been injured. Latest reports say the train came into the busy Once station during the morning rush hour. It failed to stop and then hit a barrier at the end of the platform.